anglers, welcome back to Teaching Fishing. I'm Captain Lance Valentine, and today we are into our 8 steps. We're going to go something different. In previous episodes, we've actually broken down one of the 8 steps of our 8 steps to catching more fish. And now that we've broken them all down, it's time to talk about the application, how each of them fits and how you can use each one of them on the water to catch more fish. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite ways to catch fish, and that is crankbaits, and how crankbaits fit into the 8 steps to catching more fish. Before we go any further, let's go back and review what the Teaching Fishing 8 steps are. And they are: step number 1, be in the right location. Step number 2, be in the right depth of water, know how deep the fish are. Step number 3 is get your lure to the right depth. Step number 4 is have the right lure speed. Step number 5, have the right lure size. Step number 6 is the right lure shape. Step number 7 is the right lure action. And step number 8 is the right lure color. Remember, we want to do these things in order that they're listed, because number 1 is much more important than number 6, and number 3 is much more important than number 8. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But those are the 8 steps. And today, we're going to talk about application and applying those 8 steps when you're on the water, when you are crankbait fishing. So let's start with just a basic. What is a crankbait? Most of us know what a crankbait is. It's one of my favorite ways to catch every fish that I fish for, especially walleye. But it's basically any lure that is designed to be moved through the water by reeling in, like cranking, or by trolling. That's what a crankbait is. Now, crankbaits come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, actions. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, that's part of our 8-step application, because those are all a different step. But they all come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, actions. Everything that you need to catch fish can be done with a crankbait. Now, crankbaits were originally designed to do one thing. They're designed basically to imitate different forage. That's why you see different sizes, different shapes, different actions of crankbaits, because we're trying to imitate the bait fish that whatever game fish we're fishing for today is actually feeding on. So that's a big part of the process, and we'll talk about that when we talk about lure size, lure shape, and lure action. But understand that knowing what kind of forage fish that your fish are feeding on, the game fish you want to catch are feeding on, that is a very, very important part of picking the right crankbait. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to break down how crankbaits fit into the 8 steps. And believe it or not, we're going to cover 6 of these. We're going to go through them fairly quickly, but we just want to give you an idea of how crankbaits fit into our 8 steps. We're going to talk about getting your lure to the right depth, getting the right speed, getting the right size, shape, and action, and lastly, getting the right color. So when we're dealing with crankbaits, we can get you dialed into which of the 8 steps you need to think about when you're on the water. So that's what we're doing today. Stay tuned. We're going to be back right after this break and talk about the 8 steps application, how to use the 8 steps to catch more fish with crankbaits every time you're on the water.
Are you serious about becoming a better angler? Increasing your catch rate? Then be sure to check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service. The Teachin' Fishin' subscription service gives you access to exclusive web programming, seminars, live events, articles, workshops, and more every month. Early registration times and discounts on classes, events, and fishing education weekends gives you first chance to guarantee your spot. Check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service benefits and sign-up information by going to teachinfishin.com and following the links.
Okay, welcome back to Teaching Fishing. I'm Captain Lance Valentine, and today we are doing a 8-step application, how to apply our 8 steps to catching more fish into your fishing when you're fishing with crankbaits. So we're going to start with 2 of the simplest, but obviously the most important because they are higher on the list, but they're actually fairly easy to do, and that is lure depth and lure speed. These are the first 2 things that we want to cover when we talk about applying the 8 steps to our crankbait fishing. So you can see where lure or depth of lure is. Remember, this line is kind of our transition from the where we need to fish, and the bottom of the line is what we call the what. So we're still in that first part of what we call above the line, the most important part, and that is getting our lures to the right depth, our crankbaits to the right depth. What are we trying to do every time we're on the water fishing with crankbaits? Doesn't matter if we're casting for bass or we're trolling for walleyes. It doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is get our lures into an area that we call the box of death. Where do our lures need to be in the water column to be effective? Sometimes that's very high in the water column. Sometimes that may be right close to the bottom. Sometimes that box of depth may be 6 or 8 feet high. You can get your bait anywhere in that box. You're going to catch fish. Sometimes it can be very, very narrow, and you've got to get those baits in a very, very specific slice of the water column. But that's what we're trying to figure out every day around the water is where is our box of depth? Where do our baits need to be effective? One of the ways we do that is by using our sonar, figuring out where the fish are in the water column first and aiming our baits above those fish. Remember, game fish, all kinds of game fish that we fish for, have their eyes high and forward on their head, so they are literally up feeders. If they're feeding on the bottom, they'll actually take their body and move their body to move their triangle of sight so they can actually see, and they'll attack from the top. But most of the time, fish are up feeders because of the way their eyes are positioned. So using our sonar to find fish in the water column is going to let us know where those fish are and let us know where we need to put our baits, where we need to start thinking about where to put our box of death so our crankbaits can be effective. Okay, let's talk about some conditions that affect how deep our lure is going to be. There are some very, very specific conditions that you need to think about getting your crankbaits close to the fish. That's when the fish are closer to the bottom. Post-frontal conditions, anytime you're dealing with dirty water. Pressured fish have a tendency to not really go too far to find a lure. Fish in heavy cover. And then anytime you're dealing with night or low light conditions, you want to make sure that your crankbaits, the depth of your lure is very, very close to where the fish are. Conversely, there are some conditions that we want to get our baits actually physically away from the fish, higher in the water column, further away, because they will get more bites if they are off the bottom. Those conditions are fish off the bottom, very, very stable weather. You get 2, 3, 4, 5 days of the same weather. Fish are on the bite and they will chase a bait. Anytime you got clean water and fish can see a long way. Anytime you got schooled or active fish that may be competing, which may say, hey, I need to get out of here, you can get a situation where fish will go a long way to get a bait. Anytime you're dealing with fish in open water away from structure, they have a tendency to chase bait. And clear conditions, clear sky, clear water, create situations where you can get your baits away from the fish. Again, remember, we're using our sonar first to figure where the fish are, and then we've got to start figuring out where we need to put our baits away from those fish to find that box of death. Something that's really important you need to pay attention to if you're an angler is water clarity, because we know that walleyes, we're talking about walleyes here mostly tonight. We're talking about crankbaits in general, but we're really going to focus on walleye fishing. Walleyes, unlike bass. Now, bass can hear a bait, they'll go attack it, they'll just kind of go, I think something's up there, and they'll go bite it. Walleyes aren't like that. We know that walleyes, the last trigger to get a walleye to bite is he has to see a lure. So we have to think of what we call the visual zone of awareness. This applies for all game fish too, but some game fish use more than just their eyesight to attack bait. But the clearer the water is, the further away from the fish my lure or my crankbait should be. The dirtier the water is, I should be able to get that bait right close to the fish to get him to bite. So be aware of that. We're going to find fish on our sonar and then take into consideration the clarity of the water, and then start putting your crankbaits in the water to figure out where you can get those fish and how big and where that slice of the pie or the slice of the water column, that box of death, really is. How do we get our crankbaits to the right depth? Pretty simple. I use an app called Precision Trolling Data. You can get it online. It's one of my favorite apps. It's something I would not be on the water without. And what it allows me to do is to dial up any bait that I'm fishing. There's a picture of the bait on each bait has its own page on the app. There's a picture of the bait, and then what I do is I dial in, I tell the app how deep I want a bait to run, and it's going to tell me how many feet of line I need to let out to get that bait to run that depth. So if I know I want to get my baits all at 10, 11 feet, I can pick any of these 3 baits over here. They're all different lures, and I can go to each page on the app and I can get each of them at 10 feet deep. They may be, one may have 30 feet of line out, one may have 60 feet of line out, one may need 100 feet of line to get to 10 feet, but I know that they're all at 10 feet and I'm in that box of death where I need to be. A very, very important part of crankbait fishing is controlling the depth of your lure. Remember where that's at in our 8 steps. It's way up there at the top. We need to get that depth right, and the best way to do it with crankbaits is to use the Precision Trolling app. Okay, let's go on to the next step. We're now dropped below the line, what we call the water, kind of the presentation part of the puzzle, and that is lure speed. Again, very, very important every day. Some basics. How fast can I go, or how fast should I go? Remember, the more active a fish is, the faster a lure can be presented and still create a bite. Use that to your advantage to get the most fish possible from a single school. Remember, if we have a school of 50 fish, there are going to be some fish in that school that are very, very active. Use very, very fast speeds to get those active fish out first. Then you can go back over that school a little bit slower and get fish that aren't quite as active. Use high speeds, and for walleye, I'm talking 2.5, 2.8, 3, 3.2, 3.4, 3.6, speeds that you might not have thought of for walleye, you can run your lures very, very, very fast and get those aggressive fish out and then go back to the school, slow down, and pick all the fish out of that school. So don't be afraid to go fast. But again, because water temperature, water clarity, natural conditions affect how fish act, there are some situations where you might want to think about going a little bit slower. Those are very simple. Anytime fish are close to the bottom. So remember, so these are going to these are actually mirroring the times that we want to make sure that our baits are actually close to the fish. So closer to the fish we need to be, the slower we need to go. So times you want to think about running a slow speed, fish close to the bottom, post-frontal conditions, dirty water, pressured fish, fish in heavy cover, and low light conditions. Surprise, the next slide is going to be times when you should run your lures fast. Faster than you even think is fast. When fish are off the bottom, stable weather conditions, clear water, school active fish, fish in open water, and clear conditions. So remember, those two slides, slow versus fast, big or close versus far, those two coincide. The closer your baits need to be, the slower you should go. The further your baits can be from the fish, the faster you can go. Keep that in mind when you are setting your crankbait spread and setting up the depth of your lures and your speed. That's a very, very important part of the puzzle. That's why it's up there at step 3 and step 4. Understand that there are subsurface currents and surface currents in almost every body of water that we fish, and they will affect how fast your crankbait is actually moving. So we like to use the speed over ground in our GPS to see how fast our boat is moving, but we also, all the teachers here at Teaching Fishing, we all use some type of probe, like the Fishhawk. I use the new portable Fishhawk X2. I know a couple of our guys use the Fishhawk that's actually the X4 that actually mounts to your boat. Probes like the Trollmaster system allow you to put a probe in front of a lure and actually see how fast that lure is going. Some way to measure how fast your lures are, how fast the current is where your baits are. Because remember, if you're trolling into a current, your baits are going to have a faster action. If you're trolling with the current, they're going to have a softer action, even though your speed over ground may be the same. We're going to talk about that more in some of our crankbait seminars, but that's important to understand. Not only do you need to measure your speed at the surface, speed over ground, you also need a way to know how fast your lures are moving down at depth and how current is affecting them. Okay? So again, let's go back and let's look at our 8 steps before we wrap this up. Lure, we talked about depth of lure and lure speed. Those two are very important. They're at the top of the list. Pay attention to those. Get your lure to the right depth by using that precision trolling app and know how close you need to be to the fish based on the water clarity and where they are positioned in the water column, and have a way to measure your speed both at the surface and where the baits are. You're going to catch a lot more fish. All right, let's take a break and we'll be back to cover 2 more steps, actually 3 more steps that are very important in catching fish on crankbaits every time you're on the water.
Are you serious about becoming a better angler? Increasing your catch rate? Then be sure to check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service. The Teachin' Fishin' subscription service gives you access to exclusive web programming, seminars, live events, articles, workshops, and more every month. Early registration times and discounts on classes, events, and fishing education weekends gives you first chance to guarantee your spot. Check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service benefits and sign-up information by going to teachinfishin.com and following the links.
Welcome back, anglers. I'm Captain Lance Valentine. Tonight we are talking about crankbait application in our 8 steps to catching more and bigger fish. How you can use the 8 steps every time you're fishing crankbaits to catch more fish. So now we're into kind of picking a lure. We talked about getting your lure to the right depth. We talked about getting the right speed. Now we're actually going to open our tackle box and pick the right lure. And I've grouped these 3 steps together: lure size, lure shape, and lure action, because they kind of all fit together and they kind of all help us grab the right lure out of our thousands of lures we have in our tackle box. So one of the things you want to think about when you're talking about lure size, lure shape, and lure action is what kind of forage fish are the game fish you're fishing for feeding on. Are they bass? Are they feeding on gobies? Are they walleyes? Are they feeding on shiners in open water? Are they deep water fish? Maybe they're steelhead, or maybe they're deep water walleye, they're feeding on smelt. Maybe they're fish in the weeds, walleyes or bass, and they're feeding on perch. That size, shape, and action is all dictated by the type of forage that the fish that you're angling for or fishing for. What is that game fish eating right now? That's what you want your crankbait to look like and move like. So lure size, lure shape, and lure action. Okay. How big is too big? Let's talk about this. We know that, bass fishing guys, I've seen my bass fishing friends fish, 9, 10, 11, 12-inch plastic worms, even here in Michigan. You see some big crankbaits. You see big topwater lures. Walleye guys, I have a tendency to think that walleyes need to be small. But let's kind of back up. How big is too big for walleye? Remember that walleye are top-end predators with a whole mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. What do walleyes eat? Anything they want. That's kind of the standing joke. But remember that a walleye's preferred forage is 1/4 to 1/3 their body length. So here in the Great Lakes, if we want a 10-pound walleye, which we consider a trophy, that fish is usually about 30 inches, which means that fish's preferred forage is 7.5 to 10 inches long. You're not going to scare walleyes away with a 3 or 4-inch crankbait. So don't be afraid to be a little too big sometimes. And we're going to talk about times that you want to go bigger baits. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But don't be afraid to fish too big. You want to make sure you have lures in your box, all different sizes. All right. Again, we're going to kind of break this down into bullet points. So when are there times that our lure should be small or on the smaller side of the spectrum? Anytime fish are close to the bottom, post-frontal conditions, clean water, pressured fish, and then late spring and early summer, because up here in Michigan, where I'm at, in the upper Great Lakes, we don't get bait fish hatches until late April, early May. So if you're fishing early season, we have a non-closed season here on the Great Lakes, so we can fish as soon as the ice goes out in March and April. There is no 2-inch bait left. That's all either grown up or been eaten. We don't get small bait until we get our first bait fish hatch, usually middle of May. So late spring, early summer, start thinking about small baits because there is a lot of small bait in the water. When should your lures be big? Okay? And I mean big. We've already talked about size, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches even for walleyes. Cold water. The colder the water is, the bigger your lure should be. Think about it. Cold water happens early in the spring and ice out. There is no small bait left. And cold water happens again in the fall when fish are feeding up to get through the fall and the winter. They want an easy meal. They want a lot of protein with less bites, big baits. So cold water, stable weather, open water fish, sturdy, stained or dirty water so fish can actually find the bait. Fish in cover, again, so they can find that bait a lot easier. It's a lot easier to see a 6-inch lure in the weeds than it is a 2-inch lure. And then anytime you're dealing with night or low light conditions, give them a big profile so they can find it. That's when your lures should be bigger. Don't be afraid to fish big, you walleye guys. This is a 28-inch walleye, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 gizzard shad. Those gizzard shad were all about 5 to 6 inches long. 13 5 to 6-inch gizzard shad came out of a 28-inch walleye. That's what cold water fall season does. Don't be afraid to fish a bait. You don't need to fish a 2-inch bait when the water's cold. Fish big. But this next picture, our good friend the northern pike tells us that sometimes small is better. When there's a lot of young of the year hatch, these are actually young of the year perch. When the young of the year hatches and it gets 1, 2 inches long, it becomes a viable bait source. And fish that are around, especially in the weeds, will gorge themselves on smaller bait. Your lure needs to be small. You're not going to catch fish like this pike with a 7 or 8-inch bait when he's feeding on 2-inch perch. Conversely, you're not going to catch this walleye on a 2-inch bait when he's feeding on 5, 6, 7, 8-inch gizzard shad. Does that make sense? So lure size is very, very, very important. Okay? After that, lure shape becomes a big part of the puzzle. We should all have crankbaits in our box that are long and skinny, short and skinny, short and fat, kind of like shad baits, longer and fatter. We should have all different kinds of shapes and sizes of baits in our box. And you notice we haven't talked about color yet. We should have more sizes and shapes in our box in a few colors than we should have a whole bunch of colors in only 1 or 2 sizes and shapes. That's very important when you're filling your tackle box. So let's talk about lure shape. This is one of the easiest steps to get right? Pay attention to what bait fish the game fish are feeding on, and pick a lure with the same basic shape profile. Very simple. Be sure your lure selection has several shapes. We talked about that. Crankbaits, and then we go on to spinners and spoons, all need to be stocked in different shapes to maximize your catch each day. Today we're talking about crankbaits. You need to have a lot of different crankbaits in your box. When we talk to people about building a tackle selection, we talk crankbait specifically, we talk about building wide before you build deep. What that means, you should have some number 5, number 7, number 9 shad raps in both shallow and deep. You should have some reef runners, 600, 700s, and 800s. You should have some 200, 400, and 800, and 600, 200, 400, and 500 rip shads. You should have flicker shads in 5, 7, and 9. You should have flicker minnows in 7, 9, and 11. You should have lots of different sizes and lots of different shapes. So straight, skinny, curved, skinny, curved, fat, straight, fat, really fat. I call these bald baits, where they look like a ball. There's big body with a little tail. You should have all those shapes in your box in sizes from 2 to, let's say, 6 inches. And have them in 5 or 6 different basic colors. We'll talk about color in just a second. Have them in some basic colors as opposed to having one shape in a whole bunch of different colors. Because lure size and lure shape is much, much, much more important than color. So, why is shape a big deal? Here's the best example I've come up with. Let's say I'm going to invite you over for a picnic, and I'm going to tell you, hey, we're serving hot dogs and we're serving filet mignon. And you come over and you want a filet. So on my table is some food. And there's a couple plates and there's a little hockey puck sized piece of meat. And then next to it I've got some long skinny pieces of meat in a bun. Now you want a filet, what are you going to grab? You're going to instantly grab that piece of meat that looks like a big hockey puck, because you're conditioned that's what a filet should look like. What you don't know is I went to my butcher and said, hey, take all this filet, chop it all up, put it in a casing, and make it 6 inches long. And then take all that hot dog meat, chop it all up, and put it in little 4-ounce round circles. So even though you want filet, you don't know this is actually hot dog meat. You pick the filet because of the size and the shape. If you wanted a hot dog, even though this is a hot dog, I went to my butcher and made hot dog into patties, you wouldn't select this. If you wanted a hot dog, you would select the long and skinny shape, because that's what a hot dog should look like. That's the way fish think. If they're eating smelt, you're not going to catch them on a 2-inch fat bait. If they're eating young of the year perch, you're not going to catch them on a 7-inch long Rapala. Size and shape is critical when you're picking lures to catch fish. That's the only way I can come up with to describe it. Think about that when you're putting baits in the water. Are the fish eating hot dogs or are they eating filet? Give them a bait that looks like what they're eating. Okay? And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about lure action, because step number 4, which is lure speed, combined with lure size and lure shape, kind of come up with lure action. And remember, game fish are expecting bait fish to move a certain way. Shad move through the water a certain way. Shiners move different. Perch move different. Smelt move different. They're expecting their bait to move a certain way if that's what they're feeding on. Match the action of the bait to what the fish are feeding on. Using a lure with more action than the fish expects can sometimes trigger a strike, especially if you're dealing with active fish. What affects the action on crankbaits? There's a couple things, and here's what I want you to understand. Pay attention. If you're a crankbait junkie and you really want to get into this, grab your notepad and start taking notes. 2 things are the most important in affecting lure action on crankbaits. Number 1, bill shape, the diving bill. The longer and wider the bill is, the wider the tail will move side to side. Okay, so think long, wide bills, long, wide sweeps of the tail. As the bills get shorter and narrower, the tail moves very, very, very tight. And as the tail moves tight, you get more wobble to the bait side to side. So that's a very, very easy indicator of what the action is. The bigger and wider the bill, the longer and wider the sweep of the arc of the tail of the bait, which gives it a slow looking action and a slight wobble. As that bill gets shorter and fatter, or shorter and narrower, that tail gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and the lure gets more roll. That's number 1. Number 2 is the dive angle. How does the lure go through the water? Does it go nose down or does it kind of run flat? Lures with an aggressive nose down dive angle usually have a more aggressive action. They move more. And lures with a flat dive angle have a softer action. So you may have, let's go back to our steps, right? You can get the same size and same shape in a nose down runner and a flat runner. They're going to be completely different actions. So once we get the size and the shape right, we need to get different baits in that size and that shape in the water. Different size and shape bills, different dive angles to let the fish tell us which one they want each day. That's how this whole 8-step process kind of works together, getting the right action, okay? Now, I'm going to wrap this section up with this. This is very important. Remember, always pick a crankbait based on the action you want to achieve, not the depth it needs to get to. Let me say that again. Always pick a crankbait based on the action you want, not the depth it needs to get to. Sometimes a shallower lure ran deep will catch more fish than a lure that is designed to get deep, and vice versa. Sometimes a deep running lure actually ran short on a short lead and gotten shallow will catch more fish than a shallow lure. Here's a great example. This is the reef runner lure. This is an 800 series reef runner designed to go deep. It'll go down about 32 feet with no weight. This is a reef runner 700 series. It'll go down about 10 to 11 feet with no weight. Designed, look at short, narrow bill, long, wide bill. Two completely different actions. The lure body is the exact same body. It comes out of the same mold. It's the same size and same shape. What changes is the action. So this 800 series with the big bill has a very, very slow, wide, the rear end, the tail of the bait moves very, very wide. It's got a slow roll. The 700 has a short bill and it has a very, very tight action and a lot of side-to-side wobble. Sometimes, let's say you want to get down 20 feet. This lure is only designed to go 10. This lure will get down to 20 feet with about 100 feet of line out. Sometimes you're better off to put this lure behind lead core, behind some kind of weight, behind a jet diver or a dipsy diver to get it down to 20 feet. This action will catch more fish than this will. Even though this is designed to be a deep diver, this is designed to be a shallow diver. Conversely, let's say the fish is only 7 feet down, you're automatically going to grab this lure because that's designed to run shallow. So you're going to run it because it'll run, you're going to get your lure 7 feet. It's easy. But sometimes taking this deep diver and only letting it out 20 feet behind your offshore or inline board and get it 7 feet will catch more fish than this. Pick your lure, get size and shape right, then work on the action. Don't just grab a deep water or deep diving crankbait because it has to get deep. Sometimes a crankbait that's designed to run shallow with a different action, you get that to the right depth, you're going to catch more fish than using a deep diving bait. A lot there to digest in size, shape, and action. It's actually kind of the core of picking a crankbait, and it's very, very, very important part of the crankbait puzzle. All right, let's take one more break, and we'll be back to talk about probably the most understood part of crankbaits, and that is crankbait color.
Are you serious about becoming a better angler? Increasing your catch rate? Then be sure to check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service. The Teachin' Fishin' subscription service gives you access to exclusive web programming, seminars, live events, articles, workshops, and more every month. Early registration times and discounts on classes, events, and fishing education weekends gives you first chance to guarantee your spot. Check out the Teachin' Fishin' subscription service benefits and sign-up information by going to teachinfishin.com and following the links.
Okay, folks, welcome back to Teachin' Fishin'. I'm Captain Lance Valentine, and tonight we are talking about the application of the 8 steps to catching more fish to crankbait fishing. And I hope that last section kind of woke you up a little bit. You know, lure depth and lure speed are fairly easy. Most people understand that. But man, that lure size, lure shape, and lure action part is something everybody needs to get. Most folks don't pay enough attention to, so we gave you some really good tips there. Go back and watch that again. That's a pretty important part of the puzzle and something you need to get right and concentrate on every time you're crankbait fishing. So now let's move on to step number 8, the last of our 8 steps, and that is lure color. Probably the most misunderstood and honestly probably the most argued about or talked about step anytime we do a seminar. All right? Lure color is pretty simple. Give the fish something they can see. And we're going to talk about this in a second. While there are some basic guidelines, this can be a huge factor in how many fish you catch every day. But remember, color is not important until all the other steps are right. That's why we put it number 8. You can have the wrong color and still catch fish if everything else is right. Now, I want you to take this first line and I want to break this down a little bit. Give the fish something they can see. When I started fishing, really got into fishing back in the late 70s, early 80s, natural baits were a big deal, right? They'd actually take photographs of lures and take photographs of bait fish and put that sticker on a lure. Okay, look it. I'm going to tell you, don't get caught up in that. Bait fish are colored the way they're colored for one reason, and that is to do what? That is to hide, to not be seen by predators. You don't want a lure that can't be seen by predators. So give the fish something they can see. Natural tones, but some way that fish can see it sometimes. Or look at, what's one of the best colors for catching fish no matter what fish you're fishing for, no matter where you fish? Everybody's caught fish on fire tiger, chartreuse, lime green, and orange. Everybody's caught fish on those colors. There's nothing in the wild that looks that way, but they're great fish catchers because they stand out and they're very easy to see. So think of lure color in a different way than you have before. All right, let's talk about lure color basics. And we're going to talk about a couple things here. We're going to talk about lure finish and then lure color. Pick a finish to imitate the bait fish that the game fish are feeding on. Remember, shiners, that type of bait has a shiny finish, and you should be using chromes and golds and coppers, but they should be kind of a shiny base. Shad are a little bit duller. Shad and gobies and perch have a little duller finish. So you should be using kind of a matte finish for the finish of your lure. It can be gold, it can be silver, it can be copper, but it shouldn't be bright and shiny because shad aren't bright and shiny. So think about lure color 2 different ways. First, the finish, shiny or dull, and then the color. And in open water, when you're fishing in open water, which we do most of our walleye fishing is for fish that are in open water and they're feeding up, pay attention to the color on the bottom of your lure. Fish are generally feeding up and only looking at the bottom. So, you know, the whole custom lure color craze is just crazy. If you want to know if you have a lure in your box, take your box of certain baits. Let's say you're fishing 800 series reef runners. Take your 800 series reef runners and turn them over. If you've already got 10 lures with an orange belly, you don't need to buy another lure with an orange belly no matter what the side or the back looks like. Okay? There's a saying in our business that the bottom of the lure catches fish, the top of the lure catches fishermen. That's why you always see lures packaged that you can see the side and the top. So you go, ooh, I don't have that one. When in reality, it's the same orange belly that you have on 25 lures you already have in your box. So when you're dealing with fish in open water, regardless of what they are, if you're cranking fish in open water, make sure you pay attention to the color on the bottom of the lure. Conversely, if you happen to be fishing crankbaits on the bottom, you're banging your crankbaits along the bottom to imitate maybe perch, gobies, crayfish. Crankbaits are great crayfish imitators. If you're banging your baits on the bottom for walleyes or smallmouth bass or largemouth bass, and you're imitating bottom forage that lives on the bottom, and the fish are coming from the top, pay attention to the color on the top of your lure. The bottom doesn't really matter as much. Pay attention to the top of your lure. So depending on where the fish are coming from, if you're in open water, pay attention to the bottom of your lure color. If you're fishing on the bottom and that crankbait's hitting the bottom every once in a while, pay attention to the color on the top of your crankbait. You're going to catch a lot more fish. Okay, avoid natural colored lures, especially in cover. Again, bait fish are colored that way to hide from predators, make your lure stand out. I'm a pretty detailed record keeper. If you've been around Teaching Fishing or Walleye 101 at all, you know that one of the things we do at Teaching Fishing is we preach keeping good records. And our records indicate that 4 colors excel for walleye fishing in open water. And they are purple, red, orange, and pink. Or as we remember, when we talk about them, we call them prop. Purple, red, orange, pink. Be sure the bottom of your lure has one of those colors on the bottom. We work really close with Mike Steffes at Warrior Lures. We've designed a series of crankbait colors, a series of spoon colors, and spinner blade colors. Every single color that we've designed has purple, red, orange, or pink on it somewhere, and all the crankbait colors that we designed has one of those 4 colors on the bottom. That's just something I very, very, very strongly believe in. So look at your box. Make sure you've got purple, red, orange, and pink. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a little throat or a little bit by the back hook, but make sure you've got one of those 4 colors on the bottom of your bait. You're going to catch a lot more fish. And we know this, again, from our record keeping, dots and stripes increase the performance of crankbaits, especially in cold water. So you'll see a lot of our baits have dots and stripes on them just because we know that that little breakup, whatever that is, that little contrast makes a big difference. So dots and stripes, especially in colder water. Why is color last? This is the question we get all the time. Well, I was out one day and I could only catch them on one color. I mean, I believe that. That one color caught more fish. But that color in the wrong location, which is step number 1, would never catch a fish. That perfect color in the wrong size would never catch a fish. That perfect color at the wrong depth would never catch a fish. Okay? So the wrong lure color will catch fish if it is in the right location, at the right depth, ran at the right speed, and is the right size and shape. If you do all those things right, you can have the wrong color and still catch fish. If you have the right color and you get everything else above it wrong, you're not going to catch anything. So color is very important, but it's not important until all the other factors are right. Okay? Avoid putting too much emphasis on steps before they are important. Fish from the top of the 8 steps to the bottom, not the bottom to the top. And at this point, as we're going to get ready to wrap up, I'm going to ask you to take one more look at the 8 steps and ask yourself, do you fish backwards? Are you more concerned about this before you worry about this? Okay? If you've never seen the 8 steps before, a real quick breakdown, we put this line here. I'm going to tell you this, if you do all 3 of these things above the line right location, right depth of water, know how deep the fish are, get your lures at the right depth. If you do those 3 things right and get all of these wrong, get the wrong lure, speed, size, shape, action, and color, you're still going to catch some fish. Conversely, if you get all of these right, the lure, speed, size, shape, action, and color, if you get all of those right, but you miss just one of these 3 steps above the line, you're going to catch nothing. Okay? So if you're new to teaching fishing, if you have never seen the 8 steps, we just spent a lot of time talking about how to apply them to your crankbait fishing, but ask yourself a very simple question, no matter what you're fishing for, no matter what you're fishing with, are you fishing backwards? Are you paying attention to things that aren't important until or before you make things that are important a top priority? Okay? Fish in the right place with the wrong stuff, you'll catch more fish. Hey, if you liked what you saw tonight and you want to learn more, check out our website at teachinfishing.com. We've got the Teachin' Fishing TV channel going. We have articles, we have fishing reports, we have weather reports, we have everything going on you're going to need to catch more fish, all kinds of educational information, access to our library of articles, access to our library of videos. The 8 steps programs are all there so you can see each of the steps broken down. We have a lot of things there that are going to help you catch more fish. If you want to really get into more detail, check out our subscription service. You can go to teachinfishing.com, scroll down below the TV, you'll find the subscription service box. Click on the subscription service letters above it, and it'll take you to our subscription service. Every month we do hardcore information, live seminars and live Q&A just for our subscription members. So they get a lot deeper detail than our normal people that just watch teachinfishing.com do. So if you're really into fishing, you really want to get all the details, make sure you check out our subscription service. Become a subscriber. We got a great special for the rest of this year. All right, if you need to get a hold of us, you can check us out again at teachinfishing.com on the web. Our Facebook is Teachin' Fishing. Be sure to check us out there. We got a lot of stuff going on there. And then teachinfishing@gmail.com is our email if you got any questions or ever need to get a hold of us. All right, folks, thanks for joining us. I'm Captain Lance Valentine. Thank you from all the folks here at Teachin' Fishing. We're always here to help you catch more fish, so make sure you check us out. And if you got a question, don't hesitate to get a hold of us at teachinfishing@gmail.com. We love to help you catch more fish every time you're on the water. Have a great night. Thanks for joining us. And remember, make sure you're not fishing backwards.
Are you serious about becoming a better angler? Increasing your catch rate? Then be sure to check out the Teachin' Fishing subscription service. The Teachin' Fishing subscription service gives you access to exclusive web programming, seminars, live events, articles, workshops, and more every month. Early registration times and discounts on classes, events, and fishing education weekends gives you first chance to guarantee your spot. Check out the Teachin' Fishing subscription service benefits and sign-up information by going to teachinfishing.com and following the links.